If the stunt used lightsaber and the official lightsaber design are not the same, then you're admitting that the lightsaber design isn't actually that practical for combat. So George Lucas knew. He knew. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant. In today's episode we're going to be talking about lightsabers. Obviously, because I think there is a fascinating discussion topic to be had here, specifically about the lightsaber design. Are they designed bad? Are they actually even good weapons when you look at them objectively? So that's what we're going to be discussing in today's episode. So starting off with some of the basics, right? If you clicked on this video and you don't know what a lightsaber is, I highly doubt that, but if you don't, it is essentially a sword-like object that is swung around and used like a sword, but it has a superheated plasma blade that can cut through anything. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what we're actually going to be discussing in today's episode, and that is the design of the lightsaber, because there is a lot here. Design informs functionality, or in fact, the other way around. Functionality informs the design. So when we look at the lightsaber design, does it have any functionality to it? Well, obviously there's a bit of an issue here because there's so many different lightsaber designs. Some are more functional than others, but let's just stick to, for the sake of this discussion, let's start with the original lightsaber design, the most iconic, and that is the Graflex 3 cell. I'll have a full video about this lightsaber coming up in a couple of weeks or so, but for now, let's just talk about the design of it. In terms of its comfort, it is a round hilt. Most of the lightsabers are round. There are some exceptions to this, but mostly, generally speaking, they are round. I think that is perfectly reasonable when it comes to a blade with a 360-degree cutting surface. You don't need to worry about your edge alignment, so you don't need indexing. Indexing is mainly used for swords. It's contouring on the handle so you know where your edge is when you're striking things. So function informs design, or design informs function. They can go either way. What this essentially means is that how something is used will inform how it's designed. And the biggest issue that I have with the lightsaber in terms of its design, and I'm not just talking about, you know, the main iconic ones, I'm talking most of them, is that they don't have adequate hand protection. These are essentially used like swords, but they are so much more dangerous than swords because they can take off limbs with just a little bit of a flick, right? We see that in most films. I think they made that point crystal clear. The problem is none of these lightsabers, especially if we look at just the original ones and the prequel ones, if we just go from most of the movie ones, they don't really have adequate hand protection. Now, this is an interesting discussion because there are some lightsaber designs that do have hand protection, specifically the ones that we've seen with, either crossguards or subas. If you know how to use your crossguard, it is incredibly protective. However, it's nowhere near as protective as something like a cup hilt or a swept hilt. They are far more preferable. And then when it gets to subas are not good hand protection at all. Don't get me wrong, I'd prefer a suba over literally nothing, but a crossguard is better than a suba, but something like a swept hilt or a cup hilt is way better than a crossguard. And this is one of those things where it's like the type of weapon, the functionality and the design of these needs adequate hand protection. These things would be insane to use without hand protection. You would be essentially fucked, to put it mildly. So the fact that none of the lightsaber designs, especially none of the main lightsaber designs, have adequate or even just basic hand protection is a huge problem, because this means that they are not designed for the functionality that they are portrayed as. And this is a huge plot hole, right? Like, this is not, there is no good hand protection on this lightsaber, and this is the original Graflex, right? Like, these bunny ears are not going to be deflecting a saber strike, and then on this side the button's not going to be deflecting saber strikes either. Your hands are a huge target, and the funny thing is the movies kind of emphasize this because everybody gets their fucking hands chopped off. So that's the first kind of gripe that I have with a lot of the lightsabers, is that none of them have proper hand protection. We're talking stuff that actually could be used in a dueling sense. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, but the characters are just so skilled. And it's like, if they're so skilled, why do they keep getting their hands chopped off? Like, that's a ridiculous argument. So these particular lightsabers that you can see on the table here are actually sent to me by N-Sabers. This is not sponsored. They didn't pay me for any of this. In fact, you guys might actually recognize these ones. They sent me these two particular lightsabers over a year ago. So I've been using them for a year, and they are still in perfect condition. The batteries are still work. They're actually really, really good. So this is kind of like a long-term update, if you will. But recently they sent me this one here. This is obviously a Graflex, one of the OG style lightsabers. These are all NeoPixel blades, so if you enjoy them and you like how they look on camera, they really pop. That's what they're called, they're NeoPixel. So this here is the carry case that this lightsaber came in, and inside it, it comes with a acrylic stand, some gloves, so if you want to handle your lightsaber without putting fingerprints on it, a charger, a blade plug, the lightsaber hilt itself, and a tool to put everything together along with the blade. So there will be a link down below in the description and the pinned comment to check out some NSaber stuff. They have great customer support and their long-term use. I've had these over for a year, right? They're in great condition. So if you need to pick up a lightsaber, I recommend them. But with that out of the way, let's get back to today's episode. Next up, let's talk about how lightsabers are actually used in the films, because this is another interesting point when I say that, function informs design, or design forms function, whichever way you want to put it, is lightsabers are used like swords, right? Essentially in the 4, 5, and 6, because of the technology and because they decided to put it in law, Luke isn't as trained, so they're a little bit slower, they're a little bit less dynamic with their movements. Then when we get into the prequels and the Jedi are at the height of their power, they essentially move a lot faster. There is some suspension of disbelief, rule of cool, but essentially they do use some valid, swordsmanship techniques in there. The funny thing is that this isn't actually how lightsabers would be used if they were real. If they were real functional weapons, like I said, they would be used for thrusting a lot more, because chops and slashes would be instant, game over, as we see in a lot of the films. You would not be putting yourself in that situation, even as an experienced combatant, if you can thrust and kill your opponent before they can even get close to you without exposing yourself or exposing your hand or exposing different parts of your body. You'd be thrusting a lot with the lightsaber. That's how they would be, and that's where that hand protection comes in again. If you have a big cup hilt over here and you're thrusting, it means that you're protected, your hand's protected, but most of your body isn't exposed. So duels would also look a lot different. So if the lightsaber was real, obviously that hand protection would also inform how it's used functionally, so they would go hand in hand with one another. So then if we look at some of the different designs, for example, a great example of this is obviously all the little buttons and knobs and control boxes. They are very terrible. There is no kind of justification for any of these things. An uncomfortable handle is the worst possible outcome, but especially if you have something that's sticking out on it, like sharp bits or control boxes or things like that, that is the worst. These things dig into your hands, they can cut your hands, they can slice your hands, they can injure your hands, and if you injure your hands, then your combat ability is reduced. So having things that stick out and protrude and all that sort of stuff is a terrible, terrible design style for lightsabers, and sadly 90% of the lightsabers do have a bunch of that sort of stuff, which is super not functional. Any sort of warrior or any sort of, I know people are going to say the Jedi aren't warriors, the Sith do it too. There's a lot of different lightsaber designs that just have so many issues with them because they have so much of an uncomfortable handle. And this is such an interesting point to bring up, because a lot of the stunt used lightsabers actually had a lot of that stuff removed, so it was more comfortable to use in the choreography and in the fighting, because the actual designs of the lightsabers were so uncomfortable and they had so many issues with their handle. But that doesn't mean there aren't designs in the films that are not bad at all. For example, this is an Obi-Wan Episode 2, and it's perfectly reasonable. It's comfortable, you can fit 1 or 2 hands on. It has a pommel. The only issue is obviously that hand protection like we mentioned earlier. Some of my favorites are actually the clan hilts. They're a little bit more basic looking, a little bit more industrial looking, I would say, but they are they're good designs. And this is something that you can even see when we look at stunt sabers, actual lightsabers if you buy them, right? You can see that the design is very simple, very plain, just tubing essentially, because it's far more comfortable and easy to use, especially when you are actually fighting with them. And then our next point is how you actually wear a lightsaber. This is an interesting one because lightsabers aren't that comfortable to wear on your belt. They're a metal hilt that flop around. They're not actually held very securely, and dismounting them and using them is quite difficult actually.
Do it again.
It's the
So I do think that there would probably be a better mounting and dismounting method for a lightsaber with swords or katanas or, you know, sabers or just any sort of, you know, bladed weapon that you carry at your hip. They are designed in such a way that you can use them and you can dismount them and attack with them very offensively in a reasonably timed manner. When it comes to a lightsaber, they're a little bit more finicky. They flop around, they move, they're quite weighty because, you know, the hilts are made out of metal. So I don't think how they're portrayed in the movies, just simply clipped onto a belt in a very, you know, unsecured manner, would probably be the best way to go about it. I think that they would be a little bit more securely. Funnily enough, now this is just a random bit, but N-Sabers, the guys who sent me all these sabers, they also have a scabbard. It's actually somewhere that you can sheath your lightsaber blades. I didn't even know that they did these sorts of things, but let's see if it actually works like a sheath. I mean, yeah, it works like a sheath. It's also just good to have something like this to actually be able to just carry around your lightsaber blade without damaging it. Forgive the motion that I'm doing, but I wanted you to see how it looks when the actual light goes all the way in. That sounded bad. I could not believe it. I played with it a little bit and it is very, very fun using a lightsaber like a sword, essentially. I just thought I'd mention that because I found that fascinating. I'd never seen that before, but it's really, really cool. Now, I do think this is a minor point, you know, not as important as the other ones, but I do think a better kind of carrying method on the belt would need to be devised because I've carried a lightsaber on my belt for, you know, a good couple of hours. It flops around, it's very uncomfortable, and even using the CoverTech knob. Now, the CoverTech is what they used in the prequels. It's what this little black knob is on a lot of these lightsabers. It's from an old Motorola phone, if my memory serves. It does clip in and it doesn't let it, you know, fall off easily and things like that, but it still has a bit of issues when it comes to dismounting because you have to unclip it. I just feel like there would be a better method for, you know, sheathing and unsheathing your lightsaber essentially in a far more quicker and combative way, essentially is what I'm saying, right? I think that it's serviceable how lightsabers are held. I just think that there's got to be a better way. And then we get on to our last and final point, and that is material. Lightsabers being made out of full metal it's interesting, right? Because a lot of swords, you know, whether it's historical swords, modern swords, like it doesn't matter, right? Usually they are a metal blade with a wood handle that's covered in maybe leather or cord or something like that, right? Full metal hilts obviously are way more heavy, but they also have some interesting dynamics with your hands because holding onto metal for long periods of time can make your hands sweat in kind of a weird metallic way. I've gotten some rashes sometimes when I've used lightsabers for like good couple of hours. So I do think that if lightsabers were made for actual, you know, functionality and long prolonged periods of time, like we said with the, you know, all the little greeblies and, you know, protrusions and stuff, you would also probably have a different material choice for your lightsabers. A good example of this is like Ram Koda's lightsabers from, you know, the Force Unleashed games. It's basically a leather wrapped handle. Very comfortable, very practical. You would probably see a lot more lightsabers like that because just having a full metal hilt that you have to hold on to, it's just not ideal. Is it possible? Sure. It's just really not the best way to go about it. And then there's also the grip issue. You also want a lot more grip, especially when you're using a lightsaber, especially when it's like superheated plasma, right? You do not want to be letting go of this. So having some sort of texture or grip, like the Cal Kestis is a good example. It has a textured, knurled pattern on the hilt. So that does give you more grip and purchase, but also you can do that through things like leather or cord wrap, something that isn't just, you know, plain machined metal, because obviously that can become slippery, especially as your hands get either wet or start sweating. So I think that's going to round us off for today's episode. Just a fun one where I wanted to talk about some of my gripes when it comes to the lightsaber designs. Are they designed badly? A little bit, yeah. If we look at some of the original ones, they've got some issues with it, which I'll probably explore in a future episode, more specifically on, you know, the original lightsabers, things like that. But when we're just talking generally, there are some lightsabers that are pretty good, but there's also a lot that are not good. For example, if I just give you some of the good ones off the top of my head, Dooku's lightsaber, that's a fantastic design. Obi-Wan's Episode 2, the Cal Kestis lightsaber isn't too bad. A lot of the clan hilts, so like Plo Koon's, Luminara Undul, Cooley's Ayla Secura, they aren't terrible at all. Things like Maul's lightsaber, his original double-bladed lightsaber, that was pretty good. Sidious's single-handed lightsaber, that's pretty comfortable as well, nothing really too wrong with that. Kit Fisto's lightsaber is pretty good, I like that one a lot. But that is going to be all for today. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment down below what you thought of today's episode. Do you have any pet peeves about lightsaber design that you think is wrong that I forgot? I'm genuinely curious. But thanks for watching, guys. As always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.